So we're reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, starting in verse 21. When Jesus went in the boat back to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him there. And the leader of the synagogue, named Jairus, came there, saw Jesus, and fell at his feet. He begged Jesus, saying again and again, "My daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so she will be healed and will live. She's dying. Please come. Please come and put your hands on her. My daughter is dying, and if you don't come, she has no hope. So please come. She's dying," over and over again. So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed Jesus and pushed very close around him, and among them was a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered very much from many doctors and had spent all the money she had, but instead of improving, she was getting worse. When the woman heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his coat. She thought, "If I can just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Instantly, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. At once, Jesus felt power go out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" His followers said, "Look at how many people are pushing against you, and you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus continued looking around to see who had touched him. And the woman, knowing that she was healed, came and fell at Jesus' feet. Shaking with fear, she told him the whole truth. Jesus said to her, "Dear woman, you are made well because you believed. Go in peace, be healed of your disease." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of the synagogue leader. And they said, "Your daughter is dead. There is no need to bother the teacher anymore." But Jesus paid no attention to what they said, and he told the synagogue leader, "Don't be afraid, just believe." So what must she have felt standing there, waiting for her chance to push through the crowd and reach for the prophet, reach for the chance to touch Jesus? Desperate? I don't doubt that. She'd used all of her savings, exhausted every avenue in her effort to be made well. The physicians and healers she had been to, paid money to, all of them had promised that they would make her better. All of them made big shows of their dedication and their skill and their compassion, all to no avail. Empty promises and shadow puppets. So she'd now been reduced to seeking out street preachers, witch doctors, some might say, anyone who offered any chance of relief from her wretched condition. So desperately hardly covers how she was feeling as she waited for this street preacher to pass her way. She'd heard some wonderful and powerful stories about this Jesus and his compassionate and healing ways with people. But then she'd heard lots of miracle stories before about so many others, and they had all turned out for nothing. But she was desperate. So one more trial. Did she feel fearful? I imagine she was extremely afraid, first of all, of being found out. She had a hemorrhaging disease, which, according to the Jewish law, any time that blood is involved, you are considered unclean. So the fact that she was even in the midst of the crowd was a dangerous act, a fearful act on her part. If the crowd was to find out that she was there and that she was unclean, they would most certainly distance themselves from her. And then their fear might be replaced by rage. They might end up running her out of town, or worse, stoning her because of her brashness. But she might also have been fearful because, well, what if he couldn't do anything for her? What if she grabbed hold of Jesus and he just swatted her hand away? Or rebuked her? rejected her or proved to be impotent to do anything for her. She didn't think that she could stand one more disappointment. Maybe she felt resigned to the idea that she might be sick for the rest of her days, which, to be honest, she could not imagine would be very much longer. Was she resigned to the idea that this was her lot in life? This was God's will for her. No doubt many of the doctors and healers who had tried to help her and had failed had ended up telling her that, well, this must be God's will for you. You must just learn to endure it, to put up with it. Learn to live with it. But there was also boldness in this woman. In spite of her fear, her uncertainty, her desperation, she was bold enough to reach for that brief touch, that grasping touch that she believed, she hoped, she prayed would make a difference, would restore her life to wellness. The thing is that the woman had been living with her illness for so long, she had likely forgotten what it felt like to be well. She'd been sick for 12 years. And in those 12 years, she had had to endure pain and discomfort and weakness and frustration and sorrow as her illness became more persistent, more draining, so that she could no longer remember what being healthy felt like. That really is an odd thing. To be sick for so long that you forget what feeling good feels like. You reach the point after a lengthy illness where you think that the way you are feeling now is normal. You can't imagine feeling any other way. You felt bad for so long, you've learned to live with it. Accepted it as if that was okay, as if it is normal, as if it is God's will. I know people who live with depression can sometimes live with it for so long, and it comes along at such a subtle rate that they don't realize that the way they're feeling isn't normal. People who live with pain on a daily basis because of hips or knees or whatever else sometimes forget what it feels like to feel healthy, to feel normal. But that isn't limited just to illness or to disease. Anytime we confront a consistent challenge within our lives, we can forget what normal feels like. We can forget what healthy feels like. A relationship breaks down slowly over time. What once was a loving, caring, supportive relationship builds in distance, disconnection. Sense of mistrust begins to take over, and we forget what it is like to be happy with another person. Our job might become bitter and mundane and frustrating, and we might forget that at one point we found our job to be fulfilling. We can live with a situation for so long, we forget what normal feels like. That can be true even in the church. A congregation lives with decline, lives with loss of numbers or resources or status or security or identity over a very long period. And so we begin to think that the way you feel now is normal, that you can't expect anything better. You forget that being the church used to be about joy, about amazing grace, about purpose. Not because there was once a lot more people sitting in the pews. That may have been the case, but not necessarily so. But more because you didn't regard the church's call as one of just surviving. And then you have this encounter with Christ. Maybe like the woman, it's an encounter born out of desperation and fear. Maybe like the woman, it is an encounter that comes about because you manage to discover a renewed boldness, an unwillingness to take things lying down. I know for Shakespeare Church, a couple of years back, the anxieties and fears that were very much a part of the congregation must have felt very real and overwhelming. It must have felt like you'd been sick for a long time, and that was all you had to look forward to. Yet in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to gather together, and there are going to be 59 people, maybe more, who gather with us to craft a vision for the future. That's bold. It really is. That's courageous on your part. And you do need to feel good about that. You need to feel affirmed by that. When that encounter happens, when you come into contact with Christ, when you find the strength, the courage, the vision to push through the crowd, to push through the negatives of life, and reach for Christ. If only we can have just a small taste of Christ in our lives, then we'll feel better. If only we can have even a brief touch of hope, of possibility, of inspiration, then we'll be well. And when that encounter occurs, you find yourself amazed at what wellness feels like. You find yourself transformed by how your church, your mission, your lives feel when you have the faith to reach for that holy connection. When I sought out an image for the PowerPoint, for the usual display for my sermon each week, and I punched into Google, "You are made well." And that's what I got. I got a whole series of advertisements for well-made clothing, for expensive, high-end, elite clothing. Because for a lot of people, that's the understanding of what it is to be made well. The idea that if only I have the right clothes, life will be good. I will feel good. I will feel well. Maybe we can convince ourselves on November 3rd that from there on in, if our church is to be well, we should have uniforms so we can all come looking good. We'll feel amazing because we'll look amazing, regardless of how we really are inside. But the Christ-given truth is very simple. Your life, your physical well-being, your mental health, your emotional strength should feel normal all of the time. Should feel normal every day. If it doesn't, that is abnormal. It should not. It is not the way it is meant to be. And we need to change to make it better. To return ourselves to normality, to the way that God intends. God's will for us, both congregationally and personally, is for us to feel well. To feel life in all of its abundance, to feel strength of spirit, to feel beloved, to feel compassion pouring upon us in our dark times. God doesn't want us to learn to live with our illnesses, our weaknesses, and our desperation. Church and worship and faith should be positive and affirming, even when dealing with life's challenges and difficult issues. Church and worship and faith should affirm us, provide strength, inspire us to grow in Christ and in Christian community. It shouldn't be anxiety-provoking. We shouldn't believe that feeling fearful of the future, feeling nervous about the unknown road ahead is Christ-like, is God's purpose for us. Instead, like the woman, we should gather up our courage, find our boldness, say to hell with the limitations that are thrust upon us, and reach out for Christ. Reach out for holy encounter. Reach out to discover what Christian life, real Christian life, feels like. What does it feel like to be alive in Christ? What does it feel like to be fully, abundantly alive in Christ? If we can answer that, then we understand what transformation is really all about. If we can answer that, then we can come on November 3rd to cast a vision that is born not out of illness, not out of weakness, not out of desperation, but a vision that is born out of hope and faith and confidence and boldness at Christ at work in our midst. So my challenge for you is a simple one. Set aside any notion of the way things are now as normal. And approach your vision for this congregation not with fear, but with expectation. With anticipation, with boldness. For when you do, you will discover the real power, the real life-transforming power behind the words, "Dear people, you are made well because you believed. Go in peace, be healed